going to carry on and introduce our first speaker, who is Clare Seek. Clare is, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Clare, and she's going to tell us about her recent experience of fundraising through a crowdfunder. So Clare's passionate about people and planet, and after running Repair Cafe Portsmouth for 4 years, she decided to increase her impact and set up a charity focused on reducing waste, carbon and raw material use in her hometown of Portsmouth. And they've just launched a hub in the city's main shopping centre, which opened today, I believe, the first day. So it's now home to the Repair Cafe and Portsmouth Library of Things, and with over 1 million people passing by their shop front every year, she's hoping they can make more of an impact on the culture of the city with these 2 projects. Clare's been involved in raising £45,000 in the first 4 months of 2023, of which about 13,000 came from the crowdfunder. When she's not setting up and running the charity, you'll find her clearing her head by throwing herself in the sea and spending time with her children. So over to you, Clare. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to hear what you've got to say.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to see you this evening. I'm just going to share my screen because this will also help keep me on time and remember what I'm talking about. Can you see that? Yes, I've got some okay. Lovely. So as Chris was saying, I run a charity called Share Portsmouth. It's a very new charity, and we needed to do some fundraising so that we weren't doing it entirely as volunteers, and cover the cost of setting up a new hub in our city centre. And when I sort of did the guesswork of how much budget we'd need to do that, which is what I think budgets are all about when you're first starting out, I kind of looked at different ways that we could raise that money. And as a new charity, the biggest thing actually for us was having funding for someone to have 30 hours to actually do some things. And I applied for lots of grants, but when I was kind of looking at, waiting for things to come in and where the gaps might fall, actually people was quite a challenge. People love funding projects for things and kit and all that kind of stuff. But when it actually comes to people making things happen, it can be a bit more sketchy. So crowdfunder is one of the things that we did. For anyone that doesn't know what a crowdfunder is, I just got to explain, there are other brands available. I was just saying earlier to the guys, but crowdfunder is one of the platforms with which basically you can go out to the masses and ask them to support your project. And there are sort of fees involved in that, but when you're a charity or a not-for-profit, they don't take the same level of fees. So crowdfunder is a platform where you kind of can say what your project is. I'll give you an example. In fact, this was our page. So this is just the top of the page, and you can say kind of what you're doing. They give you a lot of support and advice if you take the time to kind of connect with them and on their online support documents. One of their biggest things is they really recommend you do a video because it just captures a bit more about who you are and what you're doing. And so this is an example that you have this page and you set a target. You can do one of 2 different things. You can do it all in, like I'm going to set this target, and if I get to it, I'll get the cash. And if I don't, I won't get the cash. So that's really for those projects where it's all or nothing. It's called all or nothing, in fact. It's, if I don't get this money, I can't do it anyway. Or you can do just get what you raise, which is the one we went for. And on that page, you can very much describe and sell your product, a bit like a Dragon's Den, I suppose. You're kind of really pitching it and saying, these are the reasons that you would want to support us and help us get this thing off the ground. But one of the key things for this platform, which they say, and I'm not sponsored by them or paid for them, I have to say, but one of the things they really say is you get more from them when you're doing rewards. So the way a crowdfunder can work is people can just donate to what you're doing, or they can donate and get something back, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. But what they estimate in comparison to the other platforms is you get more money per donor, mainly because of the rewards if you get them out. So it's, as I say, that's kind of the overview. You're also advertised on their homepage, although that's a bit of a game, trying to make sure you're up at the top. but you know, equally in Portsmouth, so if someone came along and just happened to be going, I want to donate some money to Portsmouth, they could search for Portsmouth and they'd find all the projects that were live in Portsmouth at this point, or they could search by an environmental or something like that. The reality is you don't get many people doing that. It's more what you're pushing. So as I say, the reason we did this was because, of course, we're going to say, we've said to people who've donated what we're going to do with the money, but it is much less restricted than obviously if you go for a grant fund and it's, you know, the very set, this is what I'm pitching in for, this is a set budget. So the reason we did it was just to add that bit of flexibility. The other thing that crowdfunder has is the ability to do match funding. So when you upload your project, it will kind of analyze the type of, you know, say the demographic and the sort of, you know, whether you're environmental or challenging the cost, you know, addressing the cost of living, those kind of categories. And businesses put in to this, and you can then apply separately. And if you are successful, you sort of double what you earn. So there's a little bit of difference with each of them. So we got some match funding from a local housing, well, I say a local sovereign housing association that I think covers the country, but we hit some of their targets. So then everything that we raised in the first 2,000, they would match, which also helps kind of bump up the total as you're watching it. So it would say, you know, today, or, you know, this person donated £50, we've matched it. So actually you get £100. So that's a really interesting way to tap into some of these big players as well. You know, and some of them, that is the only way that they fundraise, they provide money. So that's another interesting thing to take from that. What I would say, when Chris asked me to do this, I said, I'm going to be very honest and blunt. Oh my goodness, it takes so much work. Like, so the prep for a crowdfunder is really important. You know, if you've done funding bids, the amount of work for a funding bid is a lot of work, but this is not like some quick, simple option as an alternative. So I'd say the two main things that you spend a lot of time doing are finding the right rewards, because you have to have rewards that you have to sort of think who's most likely to pitch in to my project, and what are the things that will get them to part with their money. So that might be things that you can offer them linked to your project, or it might be that you get things from other companies. So for example, we had things like we've got Beryl Bikes in the city recently. So I approached them and they gave me vouchers to give to people. People like Subaru, which is a company that produces stuff that helps repair, sent me shed loads of stuff that I could then sort of bulk into special deals. And what you want is you want to make those rewards a sort of broad spectrum. So you want the ones that are sort of the £10, you could go less than £10, but crowdfunders suggest £10. And then you also want to go up to the 100 plus, you know, whatever you can do to group things. But it takes a lot of work, obviously, to find those rewards. And the other thing, other than obviously explaining your project, is the marketing of it. And so this is just a screenshot of my February meta. We were doing lots of social media. There's a lot of social media involved. And this was the amount of posts, like every single day, but it felt like every single day. Obviously, Monday and Thursdays, I wasn't doing so much. But that constant kind of creating a story and getting it out there and thinking how you do things, it is relentless. And you have to keep it up. You have to kind of keep up the stories, keep up the variety. So my biggest tip is think as much as you can about that in advance before you launch. You can vary how long you do it for, but they sort of say minimum, or the suggested target is about 4 weeks. But if you can imagine, depending on the size of your team and who's involved, it is a lot of work to keep up that and to be responding to people and sharing it to different groups and doing this on Instagram and so, you know, and Facebook and Twitter and whatever your platforms are where you can reach the most people. Not to mention, you know, speaking at events or getting stuff in the local press or on the radio. It is an exhausting month of activity. And they generally say that you get a lot of people at the start who are like, yes, you know, they already knew, you've maybe primed them and they're ready to donate, and then it often dips in the middle and then it spikes at the end as you kind of really target those that maybe had thought they would, and, you know, time's running out and you're doing social media posts going, we're so close, you know, who else can help? But the one thing that I would say that was an entertaining thing that made our spike different was, if you happen to be a person with lots of contacts that's involved with the project, have a birthday, time it with a birthday. So my birthday happened to fall. I think it was in about week 3. And I never ask anyone for presents. And I was like, no, you know, like save the planet, don't buy me stuff I don't need. And on this one, I went, nobody's bought me presents for the last however many years. Now is the time to pretend you're buying me a pint, buying me a candle, whatever it might be. So we had a random spike in the middle. So my point with this is anything you can do that is sort of really going to connect in with people and make it a bit different, like try. Because you've just got to keep knocking on doors and asking for money. That is a whistle-stop tour of crowdfunding. Hope that was okay.
That's wonderful, Claire. Thank you so much. Really practical and you know, lots of really good tips in that. If you've got questions for Claire, just hang on to them just now. I'm just going to swap our speakers over and introduce you to Diana. Diana Berryman joins us from Fuelled by Cake, a group of 5 friends who came together in 2015 to make good stuff happen in their community. And I'm going to try really hard to pronounce this well. Diana's given me some tuition this morning, this evening before we began. Llandrindod Wells and surrounding areas in mid Wales. So they bring folk together through fun pop-up events which raise community spirits and help people feel part of where they live. And the name came about because they couldn't find a simple word to describe the breadth of what they do and the realization that their ideas were indeed fueled by cake. Diana's day job is with PAVO, the County Voluntary Council, supporting community groups and organisations across Powys. And she's been involved in numerous other community projects, including toy libraries, celebration events, and much more. One of their projects was a series of fun microfunding Dragon's Den style events called Llandrindod Soup, equipping local groups and projects. I'm sorry, I've got a tongue twister around that name. Giving local groups and projects profile and small pots of money funded by local people. And she's going to tell us all about that now. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you. And you did pretty well with Llandrindod Soup, Llandrindod pronunciation. It's you're not the only one to have trouble pronouncing it. Can you see my screen? Everybody? You'll have to speak because I've just lost you.
No sign, Diana, of your presentation.
Sorry, I need to click the share button. Sorry about that. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, that's perfect.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that introduction. Yes, it all came about one day in March 2015. I saw a BBC report about Detroit soup. And that very same day, I saw on social media a call out from a lady locally called Di Greaves, who's a local mover shaker and actually the founder of Llandrindod Transition Group. She'd also seen this BBC report, and she asked if anybody was interested in setting one up in Llandrindod. So in the past, from being involved with various community projects over the years, I've seen, and from being a recipient, I've seen how useful just small pots of money can be to kickstart all sorts of ideas. So I was keen to get involved with this. So just for those who aren't familiar with soup or Detroit soup, it's a very simple concept. Basically, you have a venue, people turn up, they pay £3 at the door for a voting token. They listen to 4 people pitch an idea to improve the local community in some way. And the pitchers may not talk for more than 4 minutes and definitely must not use PowerPoint. The audience can then ask a maximum of 4 questions to each person that pitches. When the presentations are over, soup is served, and then we also play music while the soup is being served, and people mull over the ideas, and then they vote on their favourite one. The winner takes home all of the money taken at the door, and they use it to fund their project, their idea, whatever it is, and they have to come back to the next soup to report on their progress. So that's basically it. The criteria there's very few rules. The project must be for community benefit, no technology to be used in the pitches, and anybody can apply. So groups, individuals, businesses. And we devised a form for people to complete, outlining their idea. We put these forms in local shops and cafes. We also set up a Facebook page and we posted the form on that. And we made it as easy as possible for people to apply to pitch at the soup event. So I went along to the first meeting and I took that picture, so I'm not in it. We've all become really good friends. Di Greaves is, can you see my cursor or not? Yeah, that's Di Greaves. She died about 6 months later, very sadly, but we all miss her, and she's been a massive inspiration to the town, setting up lots of different initiatives, including actually a repair cafe. So it all took off from that meeting. We decided that the first event would piggyback another event to make sure that we had an audience, because we weren't confident that people would turn up. And so there was a big lunch. I don't know if you've heard about the Eden Project big lunches, but there was a big lunch happening on our town park called Temple Gardens in June that year. So we thought, excellent opportunity. We'll use the big lunch to launch our first Llandrindod Soup. Luckily, it was a fantastically sunny day because we were outside in the bandstand. A local business stroke charity called 7Y Energy Agency, they helped out with the cost of printing a stack of leaflets and application forms, and we placed those around the town. We also designed and printed some voting tokens. And then we invited local hotels and cafes to make some soup. So we had 3 soups available. We borrowed some display boards, which we put around the bandstand. So each person pitching had a space to further promote their idea. And we made some voting tokens and tubs. And on that occasion, £163 was raised, because with it being a big lunch, actually people took their own picnics, but, you know, we were serving this delicious soup, so we had plenty of people coming to buy some soup. So that was back in June 2015, and here are just some photographs of the event. And then over the next 4 years, we held quarterly events, mostly in our community cafe, but we also used the church hall or another local park. We always had 3 soups available. 2 were made by a local hotel or cafe, and we went round the town, you know, inviting different ones each time to, you know, if they wanted to make a soup, and nobody ever refused. And we also made a soup using ingredients donated by our local Aldi store, because the manager of Aldi came, I think she must have been at the first one. She's in that photograph there with her fleece on, Aldi fleece, but hugely supportive. And she said, you know, whenever you want, come with your list of ingredients. I think she said up to a value of about £20, but you can get a huge amount of, you know, vegetables for 20 quid. So Aldi supplied the ingredients for the soup that we provided. We also, I ought to say, had we went through the hygiene certificate, so that, you know, we could make sure that we were doing things properly. We also tried to involve as many businesses as possible to create wider community cohesion, and that led actually to some businesses, traders, pubs donating us, this is further down the line, donating us some money and saying, you know, put this towards your prize money. So that was successful. Local musicians were invited to play whilst people ate their soup, and you know, whilst they were deciding how to vote. And many of these were young performers just starting out, because it gave them a safe and friendly place in which to practice with an audience. But we also had the choir, a local choir, come one time, and you know, that chap with the guitar on bottom left, he's more of a sort of hardened musical professional, let's say. But yes, it was. So we were also involved, and by that, you know, we were involving youngsters. So we did offer some guidance to applicants, which we put on our application forms. We asked them to, you know, think about what they were going to say, and think about, you know, how they were going to sell themselves, how they were going to sell their idea. And so some people performed, you know, a song as part of their pitch. Some wrote poems, some had props. And we just asked them to be precise, say what you want the money for, how are you going to spend it, and don't waffle. I'm now conscious that I'm sort of up against time. To celebrate our first anniversary, we published a little book of recipes and stories featuring the winners over the year and their favourite soup recipe, which a local printer printed 300, and we sold them for £3 each. So we went to local fairs selling those. The variety of pictures and projects was vast, and we were soon asked to take part in other events, such as a local music festival. So we ran a soup event over during that weekend. We also ran some online soup events, and in fact, Transition Llandrindod gave us £100 prize money to run a soup event specifically aimed at environmental projects. And so we asked applicants to produce a little video, and the public voted online via our Facebook page. We also ran a random acts of kindness soup, and a local micro pub gave us the prize money for that. Just briefly, why were we successful? I think partly because we involved many local businesses, and the events were fun. We started having a super shout out section, which enabled other people to say, you know, this is what we're doing, this is what's going on. Connections were made, so even if people didn't win the prize money, then they still might have benefited in some way. For example, one person wanted some curtains for a local village hall. Well, they didn't win, but somebody else said, I've got some curtains you can have. So it was good for networking. And some pitchers just wanted to raise awareness of what they were doing. They weren't interested in actually winning. We also had people from other towns turn up at our events and go on to set up soup events in their towns, mainly in Powys, but even as far as the Isle of Wight. And the success, I think, because it's a simple concept, all the door money goes to the winner, which meant that we could operate as an informal group without the need for a bank account. We held a raffle at every event, though. This is fundraising, enabling others to, you know, it's enabling others to fundraise. We weren't fundraising for ourselves, but we did need to have a kitty. So we held a raffle at every event, which enabled us to build up a bit of a kitty to pay for things like bread rolls and butter, and a battle box with stationery and flyers and so on. Challenges: getting people to pitch after the first year or so became a real effort. Either people were shy, or the idea was terrifying, or the door money was not enough to tempt them. And on average, the door money was about £150. Another challenge was the name. Doing it again, I think we wouldn't call ourselves Llandrindod Soup because people just thought we were serving soup. And so we had people like the late night Christmas opening, the Traders Association say, would you come and serve soup at the late night opening? The Victorian Festival said the same, the Carnival. Some of these we did just to raise a bit of money for future events, but most of them we didn't, because we didn't want that to be what people thought we were. So that was one of the challenges. Almost finished. So because it was, you know, becoming a struggle to get people to pitch after the first 3 years, we decided that soup had run its course and we'd plan a final event. I had a big birthday party with a paid bar, which my soup friends ran for me, and we raised £1,000 on that. So we thought, let's have a big festival, £1,000 guaranteed first prize money, it might attract some big projects. We went back to Temple Gardens, had it on there, linked up with Radnor Fringe Festival, and they had a music event going on sort of in the evening. We had some money from the town council, which helped us to pay for things like the insurance and portaloos and what have you. And that event, we had loads and loads of people. We had a second prize of £600 and a third prize of £300. So over the 4 years, we had 16 soup events, and we raised a total of £4,400 in prize money given to local projects, which all benefited the community in some way. And I have to say that being involved with soup has been great fun. And, you know, inspiring other towns to start up has been great too. And it's left a great legacy of people doing things to benefit their communities. And then we went on to actually become constituted, and we formed, as Chris said, Fuelled by Cake. Sorry, I went a bit over, but thank you.
That's great, Diana. So good to hear about that, and it's made me hungry for soup, and I'm excited about the possibilities. We're just going to switch over to our last speaker, who is Mike. Mike from Transition Together. So Mike is the lead link of Transition Together and has worked for the Transition Network for 9 years and led on supporting the movement's development in the UK. Mike has a background in community and sustainability and worked in homelessness and welfare rights. Across these roles, Mike has been involved in extracting funding from a range of organisations such as the National Lottery, which has funded Transition Together for 3 years, the Arts Council, the Tudor Trust, and others. So we're looking forward to hearing his insights into how you can do the same for your projects. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to talk through basically about how to do good grant applications. And you don't need to take any notes, because pretty much everything I'm going to say will be in a document which will be shared after I finish speaking. I won't share it now because you'll all just read it and then you'll know exactly what I'm going to say. So I'll leave that joy to the end. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a quick whistle-stop tour on some of the main things I think are really useful to think about when you're doing grant fundraising. The first one is basically, how do you find the funder? Well, there's lots of different ways you can find funders. You can do just a general internet search. You can ask other local groups, people in your networks, to see where they've got funding from. A good place to start is a local CVS, and that's the organisation which supports voluntary sector organisations. There's usually one nearby if you do a Google search, and they usually have information on local funders or funding databases you can access, as well as being able to give you advice on how to actually do fundraising and to apply for grants. So they're always really worth contacting and getting in touch with if possible. In terms of like smallish grants, some of the best places to go are to find out who the local funders are. In several organisations I've been involved in, we've managed to get up to between 5 and 10 grand from those sorts of funders, and sometimes there can be more. So it's always worth doing that check, and the local CVS would probably be able to help with that. Awards for All, which is run by the lottery, also do small grants of up to £10,000, and they're really quite easy to apply for and doesn't take up a lot of time, and the turnaround is quite quick on those. I think it can be as quick as 6 to 8 weeks. So they're all really good for sort of that smaller sort of grants you're looking for, and they tend to be more open to funding more like specifically what you're trying to get money for. And when you get into the more larger amounts of funding, there tends to be more of a sort of negotiation between what your project is and what the funder is looking to fund. And sometimes that can be a really good match, and other times, you might have to slightly rethink what you're doing in order to fit their criteria, which I'll talk about a little bit in a bit. There are several other sort of places you can go. There's a website called Funding Central. There's links to all of these in the document that will be shared. and where you can do they do searches for you through funders based on sort of criteria put in. And there's a couple of others, like one based at charityexcellence.co.uk and grantnav360giving.org. But again, all of these are linked to in the document. So the first thing is, make sure you apply to the right funder and the right program scheme. Read what they want. Be very clear in your head what this funder is looking for. And if it doesn't align, then my advice is don't waste your time and don't waste theirs. It's okay to sort of, if you feel like you're sort of close to it, close to what they want, I would then say, you know, it's worth thinking about, is it close enough? And also, if possible, having a conversation with them before spending lots of time on doing grant applications. And some grant applications, you know, like I said, for smaller amounts of money in particular, tend to be a lot shorter. But when you start getting into bigger pots of money, it's actually quite a lot of work to do an application. So you don't want to spend all that time doing that application in order to just find out actually it's not really what they're looking to fund. Sometimes you can't get in touch with funders to have a chat because the trust or whatever might be quite small, and they don't like sort of offer that sort of service. So check on the website whether that's possible. But I would always say, if it is, it's always worth giving them a quick phone call and have some questions that you want to ask, and just to get some clarity before you start doing your bid. And also that can help sort of put your, you know, make yourself known to the funder. So if they've had that conversation and then they're expecting a bid, they've sort of already, you know, you've already sort of made that contact. So what you can do is, my advice is to sort of do some research around like lots of different funders and create a list of funders to apply to, and then you can sort of gauge them on who's the most likely and the best fit at the top, and then, you know, reducing down to ones which maybe would fit but possibly might not. And then you got sort of like your top 10 or top 20 places you can apply to. So the other thing to do is to make sure that you can actually apply, and this is less related to what they're looking to fund and more related to what the entitlement criteria is. And this is very important to do up front, because sometimes it can be that you're not the right type of organization. You may need to be a registered charity or some other structure, and if you're not, you might be able to partner with a charity that could host your project, but you know, there's no point applying if you're literally not going to be able to get the money because of this. The other one that can come up quite often is your annual income. I don't think this probably would apply to many transition groups because usually it's quite high, but some places will say, you know, if your income is over £250,000 a year or whatever, we will not fund you. And usually it's very clear when you go onto the websites, there'd be a like sort of criteria or entitlement sort of section. So it's always really good to have a look at that. And then the key thing is to actually decide whether you want to apply. So it feels like, you know, you might go, oh, there's all these funders, let's apply. That's enthusiasm's great, but you'd also want to take a step back and decide on what the expectation is of the funder, what the project is that you're wanting to do. Does the amount of funding, will it realistically cover that project? And I would argue a good way of doing this is to use like sort of the collective intelligence of your group to sort of identify how your project will meet the needs of the funder, of what the funder is asking for. And this is what's really important, is funders will specifically be looking to fund certain types of activity with certain types of outcomes. Usually, sometimes there's more space to be more creative, and you can be creative within those confines, but you need to understand what they are. And when you're putting together grant applications, this is absolutely crucial. So when you look through what the funder is expecting to see happen through your project, or the outcomes they're expecting to see, you want to have that in mind all the time throughout that that bid writing process, because that is what the funder will be looking for. That's the story you want to be telling them. You want to be telling them the story of like how your project is going to meet these needs and the amazing outcomes that you're going to bring through the money that they give you, and to keep that in mind throughout every step of the process. The other thing I would say is that you want to get agreement from everyone within the group, especially those who are going to be responsible for delivering it if you're successful, and especially if there's voluntary time involved in that. Because the worst thing that could happen is you get the money, but then you can't deliver. And because that would just then puts you in a situation where, you know, the funder could potentially be disappointed. You maybe ruin that relationship. And so you want to be really clear that you're going to be able to deliver that project. And again, I always bang out about capacity in every role I've ever been in, but just be realistic and check capacity, and just have a brief discussion about, you know, what sort of time commitment will be needed, who will hold the main aspects of the project when delivering it. And then basically, I mean, if no one's up for that, or it feels a bit vague, I would say you sort of maybe need to think about whether you should be applying at this point, or maybe getting more resource or energy into your project in order to be able to hold it. And that can be, actually, there might be someone or other people outside of your group who may be willing to come in and support that project to happen. But just make sure you've got that capacity. And the other really key thing is make sure the costs of the project can be covered in the amount being asked for. And don't underestimate this cost, as it can cause lots of problems in the future. You really want to have every cost covered if possible. And I think it can be a mistake to go for something just because you think, oh, well, you know, if we need another £10,000, but we can get 60, or we'll make it fit. You won't make it fit. You need to make the project needs to be deliverable in that budget. So just be really clear about that, and make that, you know, yeah, because if that with the resources are the key things for that project being successful if you get the money. And again, I come back to this thing is sell your project by demonstrating the impact the project will have. So in terms of writing the actual bid, usually I would say most of the time put in the appropriate effort for the amount applying for. So small grants, like stuff from Awards for All or local charities, local trusts, sorry, they probably won't want a huge amount of information. So don't go overboard. Just do enough to answer the questions that they're putting to you, and to explain the project and to show the impact. As you get into bigger amounts of money, you will find that there's more work that needs to be done. And usually it scales up with the amount of money that you're asking for. The more money you're asking for, usually the more work you'll have to do to try and get it. Actually, what's quite a good development that's happened over the years is that those places where you go for larger grants, the funders tend to ask for sort of an initial expression of interest. So rather than you having to do a full grant, that you do a smaller, shorter application, just to sort of see whether it's worth going forward and going for a larger bid. Even to the point of, with the Transition Together project, we were actually funded to do a development phase, where I spent 18 months developing that project. And so that can sometimes happen, though that's quite rare. So when it comes down to actually filling in your application, the key thing is read the question and answer the question. You'd be surprised how many people don't do that. I've sat on in job interviews, I've sat on many job interview panels where you ask a question and then someone gives you a completely different answer to what the question is. And I'm sure this happens a lot in funding applications as well. And what that does is it makes it really annoying for the person assessing it, because you then have to really think about, are they answering the question? Not sure. Did they answer it like 3 questions down? So it's like really frustrating. make their job easy, makes them happy, makes them easier for you to score your application, and it makes it more likely you will get funding. It's pretty much a win-win all round. I mean, if there's anything you go away with, I think that would be my top tip. Sometimes they might be a little bit more open and they'll be asking more for like a project plan, business plan, and they may not have exact specific questions about your project, though this is rarer these days. But if that is the case, I've put a generic structure in the notes for you that you can use, which basically sort of outlines a lot of questions that usually are asked in funding applications. And you will find in lots of applications that you're asked similar questions. If you're going to so say you're doing an application to one trust, and then you want to do the same application to several, you'll probably find that they're asking quite similar questions. So my advice is, like, never delete your application, because you can always take those responses and then tweak them slightly to fit other application forms. So always keep the information and the research you've done. So when you're actually answering a question, there's a couple of tips I would give. I would demonstrate how your project responds to it, to whatever the question is. If you've got some extra understanding that's appropriate, that shows added understanding of what they're asking for, add that in. And that's like, what I mean by that is, if they're saying something like, how will you ensure that your project reaches all areas of your community, or different sectors of your community? And you might say, oh, we're going to do this, this and this. But you could also say, we really understand that reaching different parts of the community is crucial for having a more diverse and more impactful project, for example. So what you're doing there is you're adding and showing them that you've got understanding of the concept and the reason they're asking the question, as well as demonstrating how your project will respond to it on a practical level. And then also demonstrate how the project will have an impact throughout the questions. And you'll often find there is a question about impact, but I think it's always great to wherever possible, to be able to show where your project will have impact in response to the question they're asking about. So if they're asking specific things, if you can see a point where, yes, our project would do that by doing this, then put that in. The other thing is, think about your application a little bit like a story, because your responses need to paint a very clear picture in the mind of the funder of what you're going to do and why it is important and why it's absolutely amazing and they can't not fund it. Don't be don't be half-hearted about it, because I feel like, you're not sat in front of the person, though you might be asking for an interview. So you need to really sell it and write it in a really active, positive, can-do way. Like, don't say things like, oh, we hope it will do this, or say it will do this and it'll be brilliant because it does this, this and this, and this is really what we need to do, and we know how we're going to do it, and blah blah blah. You get what I'm saying? It's sort of just make it really exciting, so the person who's reading it gets this really great picture, can see the potential, and is excited about what they're reading. Because a lot of funders, they really want to fund stuff that they can visualize, that they can see having the impact that they're trying to help support. So a good general process, I think, just as a way of sort of developing your grant application, is, if you're the person writing the bid, go through the application's questions initially, and then write down everything you can think of that responds to that question. Don't worry about it being neat and tidy or perfect or anything. Just do like a massive brain dump into a Google Doc, something you can share, just to get everything out into under that question, and then do that for every question. And then as you're doing that, make notes on information you don't have and that you need to gather to answer the question, or there's gaps. And then you then do a little bit of research, and part of that can be just meeting with your group, or sharing the document with others to gather their responses and giving them a chance. That also gives them a chance of feedback on what you have written. And then maybe you need to do a little bit of extra research on the internet around specific things, or if there's stuff you don't understand, maybe get other people to help with that. But then you'll have this document with all the information for under each point. And then the next stage is then editing. And then when you edit it, make every word count. Don't waffle, especially if there's a limited word count. And the other thing to do is mirror the language that they use when describing the project so they can understand it in their terms. So if they're using certain words, look them up and make sure you understand what they mean, and then reflect it back to them in that way. Again, this is part of making it as easy as possible for the funder to see how you're responding to what they're trying to fund. Then go back and edit it again, read through it again with the funder's aims in your mind that I talked about earlier, and have them beside you and tick them off as they appear in your application to make sure you've covered all of those points. And then again, I would say read through it again and make sure it is written in that active, exciting, decisive way. And then finally, the two really important things is before submitting it, make sure everyone involved in delivering it has read it, or at least understands it. At least you presented it to them and everyone's clear on what you're asking for and what you're agreeing to do. And then also, if possible, get feedback. And one way is if you know someone else who's done a bit of fundraising, get them to have a quick look over it, or at least get someone to read it who knows nothing or very little about your project to see if they understand what you're proposing. I mean, you could even have a couple of questions to ask them afterwards after they've read it. And that is pretty much it in terms of getting your grant application together. Then there's, I suppose the other pieces are, you probably will get some rejection, so you have to be careful about, how you manage that. What I would say is sometimes they really like the grant and then they ask you to go away and think about it or ask you more questions. So be prepared for that. And also be prepared to really slightly rethink how you're framing or presenting your application, because sometimes it can be that it's just not coming across in the right way in order for the funder to see how it fits in with what they're looking to fund. And that can be, there was always a bit of a joke years ago in when I was doing fundraising in the homelessness sector and stuff, is that, you get a project for do a project for 3 years, that project funding ends, and then you apply for another 3 years funding, and then you just literally do the same project again because it has loads of impact, and then you just had to slightly change what it sounded like. You wouldn't believe how many people do that, because they know the project works, and it's just that's a particularly frustrating thing. And that is actually one thing to really think about, is what is an exit strategy for your project actually when it finishes? What will be left, and what will you be considering to do to either continue the work or wind the work up in a way which feels good for the project and leaves a legacy. I hope that was useful. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Mike. A real wealth of knowledge there from many funding applications you've written. I'm going to open the floor now for questions, comments, challenges you've been facing. We had a bit of time for breakout rooms, but given we're such a small group, I think we can just stick together and benefit from each other's questions. So I wonder, Marilyn has her hand up already.
Thank you. That was really good. It reflects quite a lot of our experience in Transition Town Kingston of applying for funds. One of the problems we've run into, and it was on, as I recall it, a very small grant. I got a grant for distributing food growing seeds to try and encourage people to grow their own food. It seemed like a very transition-y thing to do. I got a few £100 for it. I got a group discount from Sutton Seeds or something, so they were decent quality seeds. We wrote instructions, etc., etc. The difficulty was getting any sort of feedback. You know, we gave them away. It was during COVID, actually. So we were giving them away, you know, we weren't in front of people giving them. We were putting them on gates and in public places and saying, help yourselves. Please tell us where you planted them, how it did. Nobody ever did. And when it came to accounting for how we'd spent the money, and, you know, which does happen and is something to bear in mind, I think, for lots and lots of applications, all I could say was, well, we gave them all away. They all went, but we've no idea what happened to them. I can't imagine that people would steal seeds if they weren't going to do something with them. So it seemed fairly safe. But I think accounting for and measuring, I mean, the grant that we're thinking of applying for at the moment is a community resilience fund. And we think the project we've got in mind, or actually it's stuff for a project that already exists, is very much to do with resilience. But I don't know how we would measure. We do get feedback on this project. It's a repair cafe and we get lots of stuff, but we need more equipment. How we measure the resilience of the people that we deal with, if it comes to it, I have no idea. We don't contact them. We don't keep in touch with them. Sometimes they come back, but mostly we see them once, they go away. We have no further contacts with them, but they may have learned something, how to fix something. That's the idea. But we don't know and we can't measure it. And some grant awarding bodies want measurement and we're just not equipped to do it.
I mean, it's not. Sorry, shall I go?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, monitoring and evaluation, that's a whole nother session, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would think about the way, you know, the way that you would do that. I mean, I suppose Chris can probably answer some of this as well, being involved in repair cafes. But, you know, if you're only having that one point of contact, you know, then you need to think about what information you get at that point. And you make that part of the condition of using the project, is that that access thing in, and it doesn't have to be particularly, you know, onerous. It can be quite a simple thing of them just, you know, when there's some, you know, like it could just be, can you just fill this thing in, this tiny bit of paper for us, just tell us, you know, how this is going to help you, so you get some good quotes. And then the other thing is taking contact details and just explaining that you need to do some follow-up. Now and again, would you be happy for us to give you a ring in a couple of weeks or something like that? But sometimes I think you don't have to do it with everyone. Think about what can you do simply with lots of people, and then what can you do which is more that's like your quantitative number crunching type activity, and then you got your qualitative, which is your more like the stuff about the impact, the resilience, etc. Like, then how can you do that? And the other thing, I suppose, in resilience is, like, you know, you'll have your stats as well of, like, you know, how many people actually access it, what items they've used, so you can do all that sort of stuff as well anyway, to give you generalized stats, because usually what you want is your you know, numbers through the door, some sort of understanding of people's social and economic background, potentially, particularly around resilience, I would say, and then some case studies. And then so thinking about how can you do it. And it could even be that, you know, you have someone there with a cup of tea sitting next to the person as they're having something fixed or being shown, just having it, saying, oh, do you mind if I just have a bit of a chat with you to you know, so we want to create a couple of case studies. So just think outside the box. Sometimes, like, one of the interesting ones I saw once was someone had like 3 like containers, and you could pick up a bean and you could put it in the container, which related to, I can't remember what the question was. How have you found this? Are you, so you can do it like that could even be like anonymous ways. There's other ways of, like, especially if you're asking sensitive type questions where you know someone might not want to be disclosing that to someone, but if it's anonymous, you say, look, you know, just could you just on your way out just check this in that says how much money you earn or whatever, or something like that, if you need to know those sorts of things.
Thank
I
you.
was involved, Marilyn, in a fundraising application for the Belfast Tool Library, so a different kind of project, but one very much where we were trying to make the link between people having skills and being able to access things and that making them resilient. And before we did the funding application, we did a survey on our social media. So it wasn't just people who were members of the library, but we asked people why they borrowed tools, what they were doing with them. So we asked them, we gave it was multiple choice. So are you using this to mend something, to improve your home, to learn a new skill, those kinds of things? And we asked if you hadn't been able to use the tool library, could you have afforded to buy the tools that you've borrowed this year? And a majority of people said they would not have been able to afford, or they would not have chosen to spend that money to buy the tools. So we actually used, and then we had an open question as well, and we got some quotes from that people gave us their feedback. One about a woman saying that she felt, uncomfortable in a lot of DIY spaces, but she really loved being part of the tool library because she could participate and feel welcome. So we used some of those quotes in the fundraising application to say, some of the figures to say, look, this is, for our members, this is a really meaningful service. It's allowing people to access things they couldn't otherwise. And we use some of the quotes, as Mike was saying, anecdotally, and just one person has said this, but this is the kind of example of the impact we're having.
But yeah, one other thing I would add on that, which has just come to mind, is if you're doing like a smaller sort of piloty type project, it's really great to gather that sort of information, because you can then use that if you're going for a larger application. So, it's always try and capture data and pictures and stuff which really brings stuff alive, because that can really help, like to report on the project that you're actually doing to the funder, but also to show the community for, you can use it for a multitude of things, but it is also really useful for giving you a sort of bank of evidence that shows the impact you're having. And so, like, for example, Transition Together project, before we did that, we ran a regional networks project with transition groups, where we ran 7 regional network workshops, and then we did a big survey with the movement. And all of that evidence actually really supported the application to the lottery. And that was like funded through Joseph Raintree Charitable Trust, I think. I always have to get this right. Or was it the foundation? I can't remember. There's 2. But that really helped provide that information. So that's also something to think about when you're thinking about fundraising, is how can stuff be repurposed, and the things you're capturing, how can that be useful in the future?
Yeah, we've got some nice feedback, but we have never collected socio-economic data because we've just thought it's too sensitive and too difficult. I wonder if other people have.
Claire, I wonder if you've any experience to share running a repair and share project for 5 years, and whether that any of the information you've gathered from doing that for 5 years has helped you to demonstrate to funders why you need a hub and how you can take it to the next level.
Yeah, so we have, like you were saying, Ryan, about the social economic, we've done that in different ways at different times. So sometimes we've just done a little season of collecting data, and sometimes we do it in quite creative ways. So it might even be like a map of our city, and like people put dots or X's kind of where they are, so that we know, we're doing spread, or different ages, like flip charts as you go in and out, like how young do you feel, how old do you feel today, rather than just form filling. I mean, but equally we do some of that. And it has been really useful for us being able to say, not so much on the crowdfunding front, but also, like you were saying, Chris, to actually future funders to say, we collect a lot of things around, how much carbon we're saving with repairing things, but actually the spread that we're able to reach, which we think is really important, because, we're trying to reach a whole city. But I always think the more fun you can have collecting data and giving people the opportunity to give you, data is so dry, isn't it, when we ask for feedback? So I was just thinking, for example, of your seed story, that's the kind of thing that if you do it with a little friendly competition of, come on, who can grow the biggest, most beautiful flower?
We tried that.
Yeah. And then also, like, you know, and doing things where you get a few people to start it off. That's the other thing I think sometimes, like, never have a blank flip chart paper for doing things, you know, something that softens it. And I mean, and if you're doing at events, it's always great to catch people when they're sitting down enjoying a cup of tea or something, you know, like sidling up and having a chat and going, oh, while you're here. Because I think we're very used to collecting data, but I wouldn't be too worried about collecting that sort of social demographic. You know, if it's a different thing if you're collecting personal data, like their email addresses, obviously, and names, but equally that's fine from a marketing perspective. But it's great to be able to collect all the other things.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Diana.
I just wanted to say that regarding the seeds, I've recently, well, Fueled by Cake, we've recently been distributing trees on behalf of Welsh Government. It's a Welsh Government initiative called Your Tree, Our Woodland, or something like that. But basically, they're trying to encourage people to plant a tree, either in their own garden or, you know, say, yes, I'd like someone to plant a tree on my behalf, and then they'd be talking to landowners, and they'd be, you know, they'd have places where trees can be planted. So we held 4 different sessions where we were basically giving away trees, and Welsh Government wanted to be able to map where all these trees were going to be. So we were collecting postcodes. So they could use the postcodes to, well, in fact, Welsh Government wanted name, an address with the postcode and number of trees that they had, because each household could have up to 3 trees. But you could ask people for a postcode, because that's not too, you know, sensitive. And then you could say, well, this is where the seeds have been distributed. Even if you don't have people coming back to you saying, you know, here's a photograph of the seeds that I planted, you would at least be able to say, this is the range, this is the number of people who collected seeds, and so on. And so that's just, but also having little videos. So Claire suggested lots of good suggestions there, but if you can just have a little snapshot of someone saying, oh, great, you know, I'm planting some seeds, and, you know, because it just adds a little bit extra to a case study, or to your monitoring and evaluation at the end. Yeah.
Thanks, Diana. Any other questions or topics or struggles that people have with fundraising? Graham, you're looking anxious to jump in, and followed by Mia.
Just a little bit by way of background, I'm the honorary treasurer of an organisation we set up in Maiden, in the Royal Borough of Windsor, Maidenhead, excuse me, called Eco Action. I think, and we're going to do what it says on the tin. And we took over the keys of a place in the new year, and in 3 months, with a lot of volunteer input and about £3,000 in cash we got from various sources, we've now opened quite a significant space. I suppose about 10,000 square feet. We'd like to improve that space, and we can see ourselves spending somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 to do various things that it currently doesn't have. That's a sort of lump sum, and I can see that naturally being tackled through crowdfunding. More difficultly, as far as I'm concerned, is actually we need to make sure that this system, this initiative, is sustainable in the longer term. 2 issues there. One is we want it to be a warm, welcoming space. So come next winter, it's jolly well got to be heated. And we also would like to find a manager for perhaps 10 hours a week, just to make sure the whole place ticks over properly. And we're looking to do that, I think, ideally by raising subscriptions. Subscription implies you've got to pay, and it's not meant to be like that. It's sort of voluntary subscriptions, if you like. And we're wondering if anyone's got any experience of doing that. We think we can lead by example. So some of us at the core of this activity are already committed to paying monthly subscriptions. But any advice you could offer me about how we can get to, I think probably, I don't know, something like 1,200 a month would really be very much welcomed. Over to you.
Thank you, Graham. Good challenge for us there. Has anybody got experience of that kind of model? Claire?
So we're experimenting with something at the minute where we have sort of memberships. But one thing that we've, having done some research on this recently, when you don't want to kind of set an amount, is there's some sort of psychology over how you market that to people. And the rule seems to be, with the research we've looked at, is that having a spread of 3 is a really good idea. So making sure that whatever people donate to you and subscribe to you is equally generous. So we're calling, for example, our memberships, all of them are generous memberships because everyone's in a different financial situation. But having 3 levels means that you're more likely to get people to go with the second one than if you have 2, where they'll often go with the first one. Or if you have 5, they're just like it's a spread. So 3 seems to be, from the research, a bit of a golden rule. And just thinking a bit about how you kind of base that is that's just from some recent research we've been looking at.
Yes.
As an idea, maybe.
We are actually steering clear of a membership subscription at the minute because of, some of the volunteers are putting in a massive amount of time, and they're probably at that stage in life when they've got very little spare cash. So we're not requiring anyone to pay a penny, in order to join. It's not. It's a sort of an enabling subscription is about the best phrase we've come up with at the minute. And we want to see how we get on.
And people still want a suggestion. I think that's the thing as well, like an idea of what that might be, rather than just leaving it as a blank, unless you have people.
Yes, I think there are going to be a few people sort of who perhaps have retired on good pensions are going to do a bit of heavy lifting here. And I think sort of, there's at least one person who said they're going to put in 200 a month, which is great. And on the lower end of the spectrum, there are people saying they're putting 25. So there's a sort of spread there. I'm kind of slightly uneasy about how explicit to be about that, actually, or whether in fact it's better to leave it up to their conscience. I don't know. It's a new area for me, and I'm looking for advice.
Mike, did you have something to contribute there?
Yeah, I got a couple of things that spring to mind. One is you could apply to Awards for All potentially for that first piece. I think potentially, depending on what where you said you were going to do the crowdfunder.
Yeah.
So I'd definitely look into that, and I'd also look at local charity, if there's any local trusts or charities that might support it.
We've got a full schedule of those. Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is it could be quite interesting to run a sort of crowdfunder type activity to do something in that space, which potentially benefits the community in whatever way, and as a hook in, and because then you can get people buying in that way. And then you've got something you can actually deliver, and then you can go back to those people and say, could you support us to keep this going? It's a great space. We've got this. And the one other thing that I was thinking about was, how are you using the space? Are you going to rent it out? Is it going to be, etc.? Because you could ask for voluntary donations towards that, or etc. I just think different ways of thinking about, because what's going to be really important here is the framing, is how you're selling what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I sorry, interesting questions. If I can just respond quickly.
Yeah, cool.
I think at the minute we don't want to be, how do I put this nicely, just another community group. I mean, we are doing this because we want to save carbon and we want to reduce biodiversity loss. And we're pretty mainstream about that. So we've already been approached by a few community organizations saying we'd love to work with you. But actually they've got nothing to do with the sustainability agenda at all. And for now, we've said, not sure about that. I mean, as far as possible, we want to be community-led and community involvement, but it has to, as far as we're concerned now, it has to be on the sustainability agenda, not on a broader community agenda, because that could sap an awful lot of our energy and not achieve what we want to achieve.
I mean, possibly that is your unique selling point then. That's the thing, and the people who you want to be supporting you, or you think about who your audience is and where they are.
Yeah.
And how you approach those people.
Yeah.
Rather than just doing like a scattergun approach, I would say, with membership. you know, if you've got a specific thing
Yeah.
in mind that you're trying to
Yeah.
project across, you know, it's like, and how does what you're doing impact on those different audiences? Some will just give you money because they support it. Other might give you money because it's actually physically benefiting them from whatever activity you're doing there, if you see what I mean.
Okay. I like sustainability as a USP. Yeah, thank you for that. That was really a helpful thought. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. I know from my experience working with very big charities that often a one-off donation is a kind of, you know, people are interested, they already feel invested because they've supported your crowdfunder. It's much easier to then say, well, would you like to become one of our regular supporters?
Yeah.
And I know myself, I'm always very partial to the whole kind of, we need 50 people to give £10 a month to keep the lights on and cover the electricity bill. Can you be one of those 50
Yeah.
people? It sounds quite doable, and that we're part of a community effort. It's not all on my shoulders. We've got more questions from Mia and Leslie. I see your hand up too. So let's, I'm keen to finish at 9 and let everybody get on with their evening, but I want to give space for that. So Mia.
Hi. Thanks everybody for letting me be here. Definitely got the least experience out of everybody here, so this has been really, really helpful. I have 2 questions. We'll make it fast. One for Mike, which is most of our fundraising that we're looking at now for Transition Sterling specifically will have to do with operational costs. Not core activities, not projects, nothing really fun or sexy, literally just electricity and making sure we can pay the rent. I saw there's a core section in that you linked to in the 2015 document, but is there any other advice you'd give on how to present our case to people?
Yeah, I mean, this has always been a difficult thing, the core costs thing. I suppose one way of thinking about it is how to support in the core costs enable you to do the other things, and so some of it does come around how you frame it. It's not like just going like, oh, we just need such and such to keep the office going, or we need someone to do the admin. It's sort of like, yeah, you do, because you're delivering this stuff.
So you
need to link,
slide this under a project to say, oh, and by the way,
you can. I mean, a lot
is what we need.
A lot of ways at core costs. I mean, this is very apparent in Transition Network and Transition Together. Like we're all part of the same organization, and we, you know, part of our funding funds core costs of Transition Network.
Oh, okay.
You know, but I mean, this was a lot. You know, it was a £500,000 grant, so it's a lot. You know, it's a lot of money. But you know, you need to build in. That sort of builds on what I was saying about make sure your costs are covered in your applications. Core costs are like really important in that sense when you're working that out, and it all depends on who else is funding you, etc., and how much you've asked for them to contribute towards core costs. But whenever you're doing an application, make sure you're including those.
Okay.
You know, so it might be like this application is going to pay for 20% of our admin, so much of our office costs, etc., etc. Or it might be that, you know, it needs to be 50% of that.
Yeah.
You know, but obviously your core costs can't be more than the actual projects, because they're just going to look at that and go, this is where actually what something which can be really useful is to outsource your back office function. I mean, I know it's not always possible with everything, but you know, for example, if there's a couple of other organizations you can partner up with, and you all have the same person doing your accounts, or the same person doing specific admin things or something, so you share that sort of that responsibility is shared between several organizations, and that person, then it's a lot easier for someone to hold maybe a 4-day-a-week thing than to do like a 1-day-a-week thing, if that makes, and there's probably some sort of savings in that as well.
Yeah.
You might not have to have an office, for example, things like that. So thinking a little bit outside the box with that, but definitely make sure you try and cover them in the initial project bids. And there are some places which will fund core costs. It probably tend to be smaller grants, And I think that's where like some more like your more local charities are probably worth approaching, because if you say, look, if you give us this 10 grand, that's going to enable us to do all this other stuff. But at the moment we're really in a difficult situation. It can way of framing it is like giving us this unlocks this all this other stuff to happen.
Yeah.
So thinking about it in that sense, I don't know if that's helpful or not. Hopefully.
Mia, did you have another quick one?
Yeah, I was just really curious about Diana, what Fueled by Cake is up to now, and if you guys are still doing pitches, if what you guys kind of took away from the soup event, and if you're continuing any of that, or if because you mentioned enthusiasm or the subscription to the pitches just kind of fizzled out. Has it come back? Is this something that you're still doing or chasing? Thank you.
No, after Llandrindod Soup Fest, that was the end of the soup events, and we went on to do other things. So we run lots of different events in the community. The one we're working on at the moment in the summer is a whodunit sort of mystery event around town involving lots of different sort of people in the town. And we did a big Jubilee Street party last year, and we did the tree giveaway, and we've done a whole day online events. So we've done lots of different things, but we're not revisiting Llandrindod Soup. We felt that it was really successful while it lasted, and you know we got a lot of well, I don't know if kudos is the right word, but we became very well known, and as a result of that we've had a lot of support from the town council running events, and from other businesses in the town. There's a lot of support locally for the events that we put on, which are to benefit the community. Yeah, I'm just conscious of time, so I don't want to go on too much.
And Leslie has been waiting really patiently with her hand up. Do you want to go ahead, Leslie, with your question?
Oh, you're muted, Leslie.
I've got two questions. The first one is, well, three questions. The first one is one of the things I'm going to start looking for funding for is to employ somebody. But it's that business about, well, okay, you can employ somebody this year, but you can't guarantee that funding again and again and again. Is there any way to help that, or are there particular funds that will be more open to that than others?
In terms of, just ongoing funding, you mean? I mean, a lot of the bit larger funders, you're usually looking at 2 to 3 year projects with those. The smaller funders are more like project based. Usually when you're getting into situations where you're asking for like probably 60 grand plus, I would say that though you're probably looking at like more than a year of projects, depending on what you're doing.
I think it would be more like 10. I've just been working out on hours and things. So we've got we had 1 edible garden. Now we're taking on 2 edible gardens. We're trying to get into the senior school for a 3rd edible garden. And the coordinator that started that 10 years ago is now in her 70s. We need to have someone to take over, and so you're probably looking at 10,000, maybe a little bit less, but we really need to guarantee that over the next few years, because it's no good having a coordinator to move things on this year and then not having anybody the following year.
Completely. I mean, I wonder have you thought about trying to see if there's any local business or someone who might support that, or a group of like people within, because community gardens are a good place to sort of publicize someone, supported by, and if you did something like, we just need that. I think have you approached a school?
Although, the schools are all penniless, right. So that's one
piece of advice I've been given. We've been in a similar situation with the Repair Cafe Belfast project, and we initially took on somebody on a freelance contract short term to give us the breathing space to do the planning, to be able to write a good funding application to have something a bit more secure.
Yeah.
So that was one option, was we just looked sort of small amount of money to pilot some of this stuff. But I have been told, certainly in Northern Ireland, and I imagine it's similar elsewhere, that the lottery fund, which is one step up from Awards for All, is people and communities. And at the lower end of the spectrum, it's not such a rigorous process as, so people and communities is sort of, I think, above 10 grand, but up to 500,000. And at 500,000, it's really a very big application process, very complex. But at the smaller end, the sort of 50, 60 up to 100 grand, it can be quite undersubscribed.
Okay.
And it's, it can be much easier to get that money. The decisions are made by officers and they're made more locally and the process is faster. So that would be one. And actually I have found people in communities to be quite responsive if you want to have a conversation with them and say, is this the sort of thing you would be interested in funding? And they would give you some support and advice about your funding application. So that's one thing. Did you very quickly have another question?
Very quickly. So some of the funding that I've done has because it's been working with children, they've been asking for safeguarding policies. Is that something that you would think of as a training session, how to sort of set up safeguarding policies?
We might. Yeah, and when you get, it's like DBS checks and things like that, you know, the child's, well, yeah, the checking if someone's got a criminal record or any sort of, there's other ways of doing that as well, is like looking for other organizations which can support you with that, because some places, sometimes you can get an organization which is registered to do the DBS checks, to do them for you, and they might have. And then I'd also look at other organizations, particularly maybe like places like childcare organizations or nurseries and things like that, just to see ask if you can have a look at their policy. I mean, I'm just thinking that short-term thing, but
I've certainly made a note of that, Leslie, as something we can, think about whether we can provide some support or something.
Like Diane and Marilyn maybe have feedback on
the
that.
answer to that one. Go ahead, Diane.
Well, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that your local CVC, County Voluntary Council, might do training on safeguarding, because we certainly do. And also we support groups with safeguarding policies for anything, because for a lot of grant funders require you to have certain policies depending on the type of your project. So, and as part of their due diligence, they will look at your constitution, your accounts, and the policies that they ask for. So your transition together might sort of be able to help, but your local county voluntary council should be able to supply you with some safeguarding policy templates, but also work with you to make it relevant. It's not just okay to, take a policy off the shelf and sign it. You need to make it relevant to your organisation, depending what your activities are.
Yeah.
Marilyn, did you have some experience of that?
We've been asked for a safeguarding policy for our Repair Cafe application. We've got a fairly sketchy one. I mean, we've got some good guidance and house rules, but we've also, someone has very kindly lent us their policy, which we can adapt. I've looked at it, it's quite sensible. It doesn't fit all our capacities, but we can use it. And I would just say borrow one from somebody else and, treat it as a draft that you then redraft.
Right, thank you. And has anybody heard of local giving? Because you have to join them and you have to contribute. Is that something that we should be doing, or is that something we should be avoiding?
I don't know.
I think they take a cut, don't they? Diana, have you got experience with local giving?
I've got a lot of experience with local giving, as it happens, because they were supported by the National Lottery to support community groups to get on the crowdfunding bandwagon, because I don't know when it was, about 5-10 years ago, most charity donations were being made online, and businesses and individuals were taking full advantage of that, but the charity sector wasn't. So local giving worked with were supported by the National Lottery to work with organisations, and particularly in Wales, they have removed their subscription fee, which is £96 a year, and they work very closely with organisations to get them started. And it's all the sorts of things that Claire was saying about crowdfunding UK. Local giving is very much the same. And they worked with the county voluntary council that I work for to disseminate that information across the rest of Wales. So we wrote a guidebook which wasn't just specific to local giving. It was usable for any platform, because there's loads of different platforms that you could use, and you just basically have to look to see which one is the best fit for you. But local giving is the one that we got to know inside out, and so I can work, I can suggest to our groups and organizations that they look at that. But basically, yes, you join which, like I say, at the moment for groups in Wales is free, and it might be in England, I don't know. And they will handhold you through the process. The only thing that you need to have is a social media presence, because that is how you promote yourself. Like Claire was saying, it can be quite, you need to be on it. But you can have different pages. They make it as easy as possible and as straightforward as possible, so that you can send out sort of automatic thank yous to donors. You can get people to do sponsored events on your behalf. You can have campaign pages, which is where you've got sort of like a particular time limited amount of money that you want to raise, or you can have project costs covered, which is your ongoing stuff that you can spend on anything. So, and they gather the gift aid on your behalf. So they've got an arrangement with HMRC, regardless of whether you as the organisation is registered for gift aid, they will collect the gift aid on all your donations on your behalf. So I would say it's worth looking into, because it's a win-win situation. And even if you have to pay whatever the subscription fee is, it might be worth it, because Claire managed to raise, what is it, 17,000 in 35 days. Well, that is just incredible. That is incredible. That's a huge amount of money for an organisation. You can do loads with 17,000 or whatever it was, and that's after a month of intense, yes, you had to be on it, but, that's a tremendous achievement.
Yeah, thank you very much.